good morning, croeso, welcome to this British Council Wales Sports Diplomacy event. Over the next 90 minutes or so, hopefully we're going to have a really interesting discussion around the whole sports diplomacy area. And we've got some fantastic guests lined up for you to talk about these various subjects that arise from this particular issue. A very brief introduction at the outset to me and the reasons perhaps as to why I'm standing here as your host for this event this morning. My name's Bryn Law. I've worked as a sports broadcaster for 30 years now. And as one of the tasks that I had to perform in the course of those duties, I was the man who covered the Welsh international football team for Sky Sports, the correspondent, if you like. And on that basis, I got very close to the team, but I was also a fan of the team as well. So I've traveled with the supporters and I've worked with the team inside in the house, if you like. So that gave me quite a good insight into the way that this Welsh football team developed and then became great ambassadors, because I was lucky enough to be there when Wales qualified for a first major tournament, the Euro 2016 European Championships. And I was part of that story to a small degree. So when this report was being put together, Gavin and Stuart, the report's authors, came to talk to me about my experiences and also the fact that I'd worked with the FAW's globally acclaimed coach education department. So in a really small way, I was able to have a little bit of input into the excellent report that they put together, and hence my appearance in front of you, I think, for this event today. I also hosted the first event where we talked much more from a Welsh perspective in terms of the launch of the report. Today, we're going to open that up on an international perspective with a proper global view as well, because we've got people joining us from all over the world. So it's going to be a great opportunity, I hope, for you later on to ask questions. You'll have that chance through the Q&A facility or through waving. And we've got the guests who are ready to answer your questions as well. Our panel lineup, I'll just run through briefly for you at the outset. You'll hear much more from them, obviously, in a moment. But we've got Sylvia Mateska, who's the Government Sports Advisor to North Macedonia. We've got Professor Grant Jarvie, who's the Chair of Sport at the University of Edinburgh. And we've got, joining us from Australia, Andrew Hunter, who was very much involved with the story of the link up between the ARL and China. More of that later. And we also welcome the two guys who put the report together, Gavin and Stuart, who I mentioned earlier, the authors of the Towards a Welsh Sports Diplomacy Strategy report. And they'll be offering their analysis of what they hear in today's discussion. Now, we need to go through a little bit of housekeeping at the outset. We will be, and already are, recording this session, and it will be available for you to watch on the British Council website in due course. Now, an important point you're welcome to talk in Welsh if you wish, because we do have a translator online. So for people who don't speak Welsh, please click on the interpreting icon, which looks like a globe at the bottom of your screen, unless you're joining us through an iPhone or an iPad, and then look for the three dots and press more. So if you want to hear it in English, then select the translated audio option there. Os da chi isio gofyn cwestiwn yn Gymraeg, fydd na siawns I gofyn yr un cwestiwn yn Saesneg hefyd. You may just have heard the translation service in action there as it tried to make a good job of my garbled attempt at Welsh. Diolch fawr, felly chance now for everybody to move on. Let's begin our session, because I think we've got so much to get through, and it's not me you want to be hearing from, it's the people that we've brought together for this fascinating discussion today. Just to remind you again, questions in the Q&A box, or raise your hand once we've been through our guests as they have the opportunity to introduce themselves to you. So our first guest is Sylvia Mateska, Sports Advisor to the Prime Minister of the Republic of North Macedonia. And she's leading on sports diplomacy for North Macedonia and has just organised a series of trade and cultural relations events, obviously based around the country's involvement in the European Championships. Sylvia.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Wales British Council, for this invitation. It's been a real privilege to talk about sports diplomacy, particularly what we are doing as a country, as North Macedonia. Since we're doing a lot, we do need a platform to share our experience and to talk about best practices so we can learn more, and we can raise awareness about the sports diplomacy in an international context. North Macedonia is a relatively small country, We do harness the power of sport to engage in diplomacy, and North Macedonia has embraced sports diplomacy as a tool of international relations, but that has been done only recently. And I will explain what was the process behind and how that happened, what we are currently doing, and what our future steps would be. So as Brian mentioned, since recently, 8 months ago, I got the position and currently I'm working as a special advisor to the Prime Minister of North Macedonia on sports. And of course, since being a sport diplomat, sports diplomacy is high on my priority agenda. So I have been, I have been raising awareness and promoting sports diplomacy, both on local, but now on a national and regional level. Just to give you a bit of context of what is happening and how we are doing in the sport context. North Macedonia, being part of the Western Balkans, has a long tradition in sport. We have had great sporting results when we were part of Yugoslavia, but also since our independence in 1991, we have, produced prominent athletes such as Goran Pandev and Darko Pančev, Pero Antić, Izgan Alioski. Our male handball team won the European Championship in 2019. And recently we won a silver medal in Taekwondo at Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games. So all these sporting results have sparked a great joy in our country. For example, whenever our teams or individual sportmen or sportswomen were coming back to our country with some of those, medals and sporting achievements, all people would gather together in the square, celebrating the achievements and being united instead of divided. So far, we have seen that sports has really strengthened our national identity, and we have brought people from different political parties, ethnic group together through sport. But mostly what I have seen in the past years is that all the sports sector and the national authorities as well, North Macedonia, have focused much more on the sporting results instead of seeing sport as a platform to promote our values and to achieve our foreign diplomacy goals. So when I stepped up in this position, I started the conversation on a national level about sports diplomacy and how important it is to recognize sport as a tool for international relations and strengthening our collaboration with other countries within EU, but also outside of EU. And luckily, all the conversation I had, they came out with positive outcomes. And the first signal that I noticed that sport diplomacy can be embraced on a national level is that when I was talking about how important it is as a country to have a strategy on sports diplomacy, they told me that within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they're drafting the new strategy on public diplomacy so that you can, the sports diplomacy for now can go under the public diplomacy strategy. And that was one very positive signal that the government and the officials that I've met have sent me. So we started with drafting the first strategy on sports diplomacy under the public diplomacy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. At the same time, we have our male football team has qualified for the European Championship 2020. And it was such a euphoria because it was for the first time that we could compete at a European level. And for me, it was ideally a great moment to showcase what we can do also on international stage using these mega sports events to further strengthen our collaboration with the countries where we were playing the matches, but also to, let's say, to promote our values, our principles, what kind of country we are. So we we let the people know more about North Macedonia, also as a touristic destination, also as a place where we share common values such as non-discrimination, solidarity, unity, and so forth and so forth. So when I was talking on a high level about these opportunities, luckily, I had support by the cabinet of the Prime Minister and the other officials within the other ministries. And since we were playing matches in 2 countries, in June we played in Bucharest, Romania, and then afterwards we played the 3rd match in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And at that time I had a valuable, let's say, exchange of information with Gavin, whom I really thank now for sharing his extensive experience and insights in linking mega sport event with sports diplomacy. I launched this idea at on a national level, and we both agree, and we all agreed on a national level that this could be the first sports diplomacy event in the history of North Macedonia to be organized. And then we said, okay, we organize and we see how it goes. So basically what we did is that when we played in Bucharest, Romania, together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and with our ambassador in Bucharest, Romania, and with our embassy, we organized a sports diplomacy event focused on trade and investment. So when we were picking up which themes were important to work on and to promote in that country, I talked to other experts for foreign affairs, and I asked them honestly, like, what's the best way and what are the best common interests and themes that we can promote together with Romania? And we all agreed that it is about trade agreement and advancing trade legislation agreements and foreign investments in Macedonia. So we organized an event on this topic. We had our ambassador who linked with the Chamber of Commerce in Romania. They hosted the event. We had 2 ministers from North Macedonia coming to the event, the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Economy. So the Minister of Agriculture talked and promoted all our best products that can be exported, from North Macedonia. And this official event was linked to a full week of promotion of Macedonian products abroad. And that was very good. They had a very good response because Bucharest was full with tourists and was full with Macedonian, Romanian, and tourists from all around Europe. And we had them coming to the Chamber of Commerce and having touristic promotion leaflets, trying our best wines and our best products and so on and so forth. And we really managed to connect wineries and other type of media and small size of enterprises from North Macedonia with enterprises from Romania. And it turned out to be a very, very good result. And I also got the information that a couple of weeks ago, they organized very similar event about trade and trade investments between North Macedonia and Romania, but now based in North Macedonia through our Chamber of Commerce. And this is very important for me to know because it was not just a one-time event that lasted for a week, but based on that event, a real long-lasting dialogue and relation and agreement came out for North Macedonia and Romania. That was very, very good outcome and very positive result. And I think this gave us the ground to talk more about how we can link mega sports event and our participation as a country at these events. Of course, the Minister of Economy talked about and the director of the Agency for Investment in North Macedonia was present at this event, and they were talking more about what are the legislation, how you can invest in North Macedonia. And once again, in the audience, we had a lot of questions, we had a lot of people and a lot of enterprises and firms and companies from Romania, honestly and genuinely interested in advancing cooperation in the frames of trade and investment between these 2 countries. So that came out really well. Now the report on that event has to be finalized, and then we will promote it even further on a national level. And the second event that I would like to talk about briefly is that also when we played the match in Amsterdam in the Netherlands against the Netherlands, our Prime Minister was invited by the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Mark Rutte, where we had two delegations from two countries watching together the game. And that also gave us an unofficial reason to meet and to talk politically and matters of economic and how we can further strengthen the collaboration between these two countries. And for me, honestly, being part of so many grassroots sports diplomacy programs and projects, being there and witnessing what also sports diplomacy can be done on a high level, at a national level, seeing two prime ministers and delegations using the football match as a platform to meet and to discuss other types of matters was a dream come true, because I have been working on this for many years now. So it was a very good outcome. We came back in North Macedonia very happy with what we have done, what we have achieved, and so on and so forth. So I think we used as much as we could the Euro 2020. We're also using now the Olympics because we had the silver medal in Taekwondo. And we are trying together with the National Olympic Committee North Macedonia to have a strategy on how to attract, together with the other national committee from the surrounding countries, because we're a small nation, but if we unite with the other neighboring countries, perhaps we can be attractive enough to host mega sports event and then to utilize sports diplomacy also in this case. And I'm sure that there will be many questions, so I can answer some of the questions related to these events. But also, I just wanted to let you know that this has been promoted also through our social media platforms on a national level, what we are doing on sports diplomacy. So I think that we are really raising the awareness about sports diplomacy and what it can be achieved through sports diplomacy. And more people are asking now how we can contribute and what we can do. And they are asking from grassroots sports sector, but also from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, from Foreign Affairs, from different kind of embassies that we have and consulates we have in Macedonia. So I think that we're building the momentum and the right network to further explore the opportunities that sports diplomacy can bring to North Macedonia, being such a small nation, but such a proud nation with sporting results. And very briefly, the next steps that we're planning to take in the future months is that together with the French embassy, last week I had a very fruitful and productive conversation with the ambassador of France in North Macedonia. In the next months, we're going to host a sports diplomacy public event. And more importantly, we are going to host the sports ambassador, Lawrence Fisher, that she works as a sports ambassador in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France. She's a very prominent lady. She has been 3 times world champion in karate. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, she's still the only sports ambassador which is employed within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and her focus on work is exactly that: promoting France through sports diplomacy, making more bids or helping France to host mega events, and promoting French values and attractiveness through sport and diplomacy. So we are very keen that we will have her in Skopje in the next months, and you will be informed this timely, so you can take part in our public event. And that is one important program that we will organize within the next month, or when France is having the EU presidency starting from 1st of January. And the second important program is that we are trying to make linkage with USA, because me being their alumni and participating in one of their most prominent program, the Global Sports Mentoring Program in 2016, under their Sports Diplomacy Division, at the State Department in Washington. Based on our experience, our networks, and our friendship as well, we will try to establish sports exchange programs between US and North Macedonia, and offering as much as we can opportunities for young Macedonian athletes and people to go through USA, be exposed to their culture, their values, and vice versa, hosting coaches and athletes from USA coming to North Macedonia, participating in a capacity development, capacity building workshops, seminars, and public events. So we do have a lot on our plate, but for us, and in particular, it's very important to have the platform to share all of this, what we're doing, and of course, to learn more, and perhaps to be together in this small but yet recognized sports diplomacy expert group. And if I can, just at the very, very end, I would really like to extend my thankfulness to all the expert group that were with me since the very beginning, because I have been involved in many sports diplomacy Erasmus projects and conferences and events, and lots of thanks goes to Richard Parrish, to Carmen, to Thierry, to Albrecht, to Vanya, to ISKA, because they are really a leading organization exploring the concept of grassroots sports diplomacy. And of course, to Gavin, to Stuart, and to Simon from UK. Thank you for sharing all the knowledge, experience, and it's been a real privilege working with you guys all this time along. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Sylvia. I mean, I've been lucky enough to meet the sporting and cultural ambassador from North Macedonia, who's been operating in Leeds in the form of one Gianni Alioski, and he's been a great ambassador for the country as well, a very popular figure in West Yorkshire amongst the Leeds United support base. Now then, we must move on because we have other guests to get through as well. Next up, we have Professor Grant Jarvie, who's the University of Edinburgh's Chair of Sport. Grant is a regular government advisor on sports diplomacy, and he'll be talking to us about Scotland's approach, post-Brexit and COVID recovery related, and how sport can be used to achieve a variety of policy aims. Grant.
Thank you for these introductory remarks, Bryn. Thank you to the British Council of Wales for inviting me to this event, and thank you very much, although I've said this on many times, to Stuart and Gavin and the contributors towards the Welsh Sports Diplomacy Strategy for a fantastic piece of evidenced work, which is helping momentum and alliances around the idea of sports diplomacy. As Bryn has just pointed out, my proposition to you today is I want to talk a little bit about the opportunity that exists. Sports diplomacy has been around for a while, but the contexts in which we live in today are entirely new. I want to draw a little bit upon the Scottish experience and share some stories from Scotland, but what I'm saying is equally applicable to many other countries, and then a few points to conclude with. So the opportunity, the proposition, and a few points to conclude with. If you remember one thing from this contribution, I think I would like it to be simply this: the message from this contribution is that sport is a great toolbox. It's not a one size fits all, but it's a great toolbox, a pillar of connectivity that can help with international engagement, dialogue, and cooperation. And all of us in this session and others are still working out the complexity of that, what works where and when and under what circumstances. But nonetheless, the message is it's a great toolbox. We need to use it in a smarter way. So let me say, first of all, a little bit about the opportunity. The use of sport for diplomatic, soft power reasons is not new, as I've just said, but what is new is the context in which we live in today. And I think there's a fantastic opportunity here for primarily 4 reasons. There may be others, but if I mention 4. Firstly, there is the Sustainable Development Goals. The advent of Sustainable Development Goals through the UN has provided sport with a mandate. Sport's been there for a while, but a mandate to deliver on intentionally planned outcomes beyond sport. This is not just sport for sport's sake, but beyond sport. So sport, I think, has an international lever, an opportunity to talk across ministries, and many people in this session today are doing just that. From a UK and from a Scottish perspective, there is, of course, Brexit. And the advent of Brexit has only further served to underline the fact that different parts of the UK, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England, have to optimize every tool that they have at their disposal to build and keep winning relationships, winning international friends and partners. So sustainable development goals, Brexit. A third consideration, I think, is the advent of COVID-19, the pandemic. The virus has affected a rethink about the world, the importance of community, the importance of relationships and connectivity. They really matter. And maybe it's shaken the foundations of what people may have taken for granted. It's certainly provided a window for reflection. And I hope that if the lessons are learned from building back better from COVID to make us more resilient, more equitable, we would remember that relationships and connectivity are really important. I think one of the lessons is that sport is a valuable pillar of connectivity. And the fourth kind of area that I want to mention, I've mentioned sustainable development goals, I mentioned Brexit, I've mentioned COVID-19 pandemic. But fourthly, I think a whole raft of contemporary sporting ambassadors, activists, new ones are on the march. You know, Lewis Hamilton, Naomi Osaka, Laura McAllister, Megan Rapinoe, Andy Murray, Marcus Radford, Mel Young, Gareth Thomas, Coco Gauff, Laura Montgomery. You know, they're all adding voice to contemporary issues in the world today. A new generation of sporting activists that should not be underestimated. So all of these things, they all have capitalized upon the use of sport to make a difference, carry a message, deliver statements on a scale that few other areas of public life can. And why would you then not use something that has scale, popularity, reach, variety, and much more? You know, it's a fantastic toolbox, this sporting proposition. So let me advance that proposition further with a little bit of context from the Scottish scene, if you can just bear with me. I do think some of these comments relate to other countries, but primarily drawing on the Scottish experience. You know, there is no doubt that Scotland gets sport, is a sporting nation, by whatever you want to demonstrate or measure such a proposition or question such a proposition. Sporting heritage that goes back to the 12th century, football clubs that have a higher dependency upon gate receipts than any other European country, significant cultural ownership and stakes in at least 4 sports, all of which are debated. But most importantly, in terms of soft power stakes, you know, there's now a growing body of work. We need more evidence, but certainly a growing body of work talking about Scotland in soft power terms. British Council review of Scottish soft power points to a strong sporting culture in rugby, tennis, golf, and suggests that Scotland should urgently consider sports diplomacy as a means of engaging through friendly matches with, for example, Dubai, Qatar, and the US. We have an Ireland-Scotland bilateral review of future relationships that suggests that Scotland is most visible in Ireland through sport. Perhaps we can do more around about the Celtic nations as a collective group. Between April and June 2021, if I use one example, and one of these is close to Stuart's heart, this is some work we've done around international engagement, online international engagement with just 4 football clubs. So it is one sport, a small number of clubs, but between April and June 2021, online engagement with 2 Edinburgh clubs alone accounted for 31 countries. In one 5-week spell between March and April 2021, Stuart's hometown club Motherwell had an international following across 21 countries. One club, one sport, one small period of time, 21 countries. And the question is, how do football clubs use that information to develop stronger relationships, ties, change perceptions? So Scotland, like many other countries, has a significant amount of sporting knowledge in its universities, as does Wales. And much of this is not fully recognised in terms of advancing Scotland's international influence. I think the work of our colleague Stuart MacDonald, and again, British Council report on perceptions of countries or perceptions of the UK highlighted the fact that universities were really, really important in this mix. Former chair of the Commonwealth Minister's Advisory Board on Sport. I'm going to mention this word, KBOS. I tried to suggest that Scotland had a SABOS, and one of the questions that I have is there any mileage in a WABOS, a Wales Advisory Board on Sport? But a former chair of the Commonwealth Minister's Board on Sport, KBOS, commented with envy on the coverage that was given to sport in the 2021 election manifestos from the main parties. You know, high-level commitments were also made by the main parties in Wales about using sport as a tool to enhance international profile. Political party manifestos, whatever your colour or persuasion, as an academic, I try to remain independent and across the board, but manifestos matter. And the conventional wisdom suggests that they are important because they help to guide public priorities in public life. But if you reflect what Scotland thinks and is aware of in terms of what sport could do, then there's more work to be done. We will use sport to advance international engagement and collaboration or grow global Scotland is not a phrase that jumps out from the manifestos. There is no action plan akin to the Wales government's international relations through public diplomacy and soft power 2020-25 action plan. So Scotland, while it's doing a lot of things, has a lot to learn from other countries. We have international development reports that champion Scotland's role as the world as a global citizen. Sport could be mentioned more in these. We have External Affairs Directorate fronted by a Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture. We have a Minister for Culture, Europe and International Development, both of whom are accountable for enhancing Scotland's international relations. But these strategies need to say more, a little bit more about promoting Scotland through this tool. We did try to suggest, there was a 29 Scottish Government review of the Scottish sporting landscape, and it carried several recommendations. I'm just going to share some of them, but it acknowledged that Scottish sport should be supported to develop its potential as a soft power asset, advancing Scotland's cultural relations. It embraced the government's stated ambition of embedding human rights across all areas of policy, and asked about demonstrating global leadership and setting standards, and asked if sport and human rights was an area where Scotland could aspire to lead the world. It suggested the creation of not a KBOS, but a SABOS, and I come back to that question again. Would there be an appetite in Wales, not for a KBOS or a SABOS, but a WABOS, a Welsh Advisory Board on Sport, question mark. So we have a raft of engagement strategies as well to drive and enable international engagement: Canada, USA, China, India, Pakistan, Malawi, Rwanda, not to mention Scotland's Arctic policy framework, with a bespoke set of strategic reviews that are there to create dialogue and cooperation between Scotland and other parts of the UK and beyond. But sport needs to be stronger within these strategies. There is no single line in the external affairs budget talking to sport and international engagement. Should there be a line in each of the budgets where sport delivers on much more than just health? There is no action plan akin to the Welsh International Relations Public Diplomacy Soft Power paper. It is another Celtic nation that holds the chair of the impressive and expanding Centre for Sport and Human Rights, led by Mary Robinson, the former UN Ambassador for Human Rights. One of the lessons from a 5 million plus political settlements research programme that's led by Edinburgh, which has examined every peace settlement in the world to date, is that the contemporary world needs spaces that can hold a plurality of politics, in some cases for a long period of time. And I simply ask, can sport be one of these spaces? An effective international space around which other things can be built, perhaps over a longer period of time, more than a single funding cycle of government. So, if you have a tool that has characteristics of scale, popularity, and reach, and why would countries, non-governmental agencies not exploit it fully to build mutuality and trust for the common good? So a few points to conclude with to draw this to an end. I have tried to persuade you that sport is a great toolbox, a pillar of connectivity that can help international engagement, dialogue, and cooperation. I've suggested that an opportunity, a window of opportunity exists at least to 2030, if you take that as the window of the Sustainable Development Goals. Sport might be able to do its best work by keeping an eye on a longer term horizon than a government of the day, an ambassador, or a 3 or 4 year posting, or a short-term funding cycle. Sport might do some of its most effective work quietly working away below the radar over a longer period of time. Sport might do some of its best work if it is supported to be more effective in the cross-party agreed space as well as the non-governmental space. We have moved well beyond the sports world simply talking to itself. Sport itself should fully grasp the opportunity that it has to be part of building more effective international and cultural relations, seem to be contributing further to an enlarged common good. Foreign diplomats, ambassadors, civil servants, cultural agencies, communities, countries, and individuals need to recognize that they have a wide variety of tools at their disposal. And sport is one of these tools. And sports diplomacy is a smart way to use it. So just to conclude, we should not be surprised by this Welsh report. We should not be surprised that Wales are one of the countries that's taking a lead around sports diplomacy. We should not be surprised that we have Welsh enlightenment in this area, for it was a Welsh writer. Can I remind you that it was a Welsh writer who penned the intervention called Resources of Hope quite a while ago. But it was argued that in art, music, education, and more could be found incredible resources to build a new social world. It was ironic that Raymond Williams, the author of this, failed to talk about the importance of sport in Welsh culture when he called for artists, musicians, academics, writers, organizations to balance their freedoms with a duty to serve to help others and contribute to making the art of the possible possible. Thankfully, my last comment, due to this report, and if diplomacy in any way contributes to making the art of the possible possible, and sport is at the table, then we should thank the British Council Wales, we should thank Stuart Murray, Gavin Price, Laura McAllister, and many others for another fantastic Welsh intervention and Welsh enlightenment. Thank you very much.
Diolch, Grant. I look forward to the Celtic World Cup 2034. Let's move on. We have one more guest to introduce to you, again, to give you the global aspect Andrew Hunter is joining us from Australia, so it's Noswaith. Good evening, I think, to you there, Andrew. Now, Andrew is the man who wrote the book, indeed led the project that involved Port Adelaide, the Aussie Rules Football Club, and their growth in the country of China, the move in itself to China, fascinating. And Andrew, over to you now.
Thanks very much, Bryn. I hope everyone can hear me well, and thanks very much to the British Council of Wales for the invitation to talk. After I spoke to Stuart initially about this, and then to Rosa and Hasina about the opportunity, I mean, I struggled a little bit with the idea of rendering this case study and finding a relevance in the context of the other presenters that are looking very much from a national perspective. But I think the relevance could potentially be found because it is a distinctive case study. So when I think about Port Adelaide, a professional Australian rules football club, being used or encouraging, inspiring further engagement between Australia and China, its distinctive nature, I think, really stands out. The sport is only played in Australia at the moment. It is our most popular sport in terms of television and in-stadium audience. It's distinctive in itself because it has such a strong Indigenous influence and identification. It was used as a tool of diplomatic engagement ultimately with China, but perhaps its other distinctive quality is that it was a bottom-up process. So Port Adelaide's engagement with China was not built on or prompted by our national government, our sovereign government's sports diplomacy strategy. It's something that really came from the bottom up, and I think as a club and as a code, as a sport, we then brought the government and governments along with us to, I think, achieve something that was quite wonderful between Australia and China in a really difficult context. To be really clear, at the beginning, when Port Adelaide Football Club announced that it wanted to engage in China in 2014, it was commercially motivated. Port Adelaide Football Club is one of 18 clubs in the Australian Football League, but more importantly, one of 90 to 100 professional sporting teams and clubs in Australia. So it's a very contested landscape. And if you put that in context, it's about the same amount of professional sporting clubs as there are in the United States, which clearly has a much bigger population and market. So for Port Adelaide to reach out with Australia's main training partner at the time and try and find a relevance in China to be able to expand its commercial possibilities, I think was quite an innovation. But from the beginning, we knew that for that to work, firstly, we had to be extremely targeted. And we knew that what we had to offer, our value was found not in China, but in Australia. So we had to target commercial bodies that were looking, Chinese commercial bodies that were looking to invest in Australia and trying to present our sport as an avenue or a vehicle through which they could achieve that. But most importantly, with China, we knew that association with government, support from government, gave it a great credibility. So we knew that the government was going to be part of the strategy that we developed from 2015 onwards. And when I reflect back on the 5 years that I was involved, and not being a particularly commercial person, I think that what we achieved from a sports diplomacy perspective is an example that I think will be far more enduring. Our commercial objectives were fulfilled. During that 5-year period, we were able to, one, fund our activities, and we ended up playing 3 official in-season games in China. But we also attracted 2 major level partnerships. So Australian football, of course, is played in Australia, so it's perhaps not the same level as you would think of soccer or other international sports. But these are sponsorships, multi-year sponsorships worth over $1 million a year. So not an insignificant amount in the context of our business. When we first started looking to create engagement between the two countries, it happened quite quickly. So I started working at Port Adelaide Football Club in 2015. We were able to sign our first multi-year commercial agreement worth, as I said, over $1 million a year later that year. And in 2016, on Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's first ever official visit to China as Prime Minister, he announced at the first event on the official program of that trip, he used that platform to announce Port Adelaide's intentions to play an official game in China. So right from the beginning, and this took a lot of work over a 6-month period to make that happen, but right from the beginning, we did understand that that sport and the uniqueness of what we are trying to do could be a positive platform between Australia and China. And to put that in context, when Australia normalised its relations with the People's Republic of China in 1972, and the first Prime Minister to go to China thereafter was Gough Whitlam in 1973. And his first visit and his first official program, he went and met Zhou Enlai in the Great Hall of the People. Malcolm Turnbull chose his first engagement on the official program to make this announcement. So it was quite a special moment for us. But that set in train a number of events which I think suggest, if you take the ensemble together, that we were doing something that made a contribution to the bilateral relationship. In 2017, Premier Li Keqiang came to Australia on a state visit. It was a 3-year program. And on the 25th of March, on the third day of that 3-day program, Premier Li Keqiang came to a football game with Malcolm Turnbull, the then Australian Prime Minister, and watched Port Adelaide play Sydney. He was in our change rooms before the game. He met the coach and the players. He was wearing a Port Adelaide scarf. So that further vindicated our sense that what we were creating was actually something quite special between the two countries. The game was ultimately played. The first official in-season game was played a few months later in 2017. But thereafter, there was a real the issues that emerged between Australia and China at that time became more evident. So the bilateral relationship has since traversed an extremely difficult period. And there was a time over about a 9-month period where Australian ministers looking to visit China to have official government-to-government meetings were refused visas. So such was the freeze that Australia was in at the time with China, that ministers would offer to go and have government-to-government engagement, offer to come to China, apply for an official visa to have those meetings, and have the visas refused. So in 2018, we played the second official match in China. And it was at that moment that our Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment, someone called Stephen Chiobo, was given a visa to come to China and to hold a government-to-government meeting just prior to that match at the stadium itself. So over the period before that, preceding that, he'd been refused a visa to go to China 3 times. And at the 4th time of asking to come to the match itself, he was given a visa, and our club made a modest contribution through the Chinese embassy in Australia to that conversation. So once again, you see, despite the bilateral relationship that has been since in free fall, there was this sense that sport could provide some sort of refuge from that, and a positive platform from which I think people on both sides hoped we could generate a little bit more positive momentum. But I think the greatest contribution that was made through what we were trying to do in China to the bilateral relationship and to the landscape of the Australia-China relationship was the following year in 2019. So we, by that time, had played 2 official games in China. We'd been involved in some wonderful moments between the 2 governments, but we knew that a sporting game alone each year in China would become a tired concept. We couldn't hope to try and generate the same inspiration from that if we kept replicating the same concept. So we had this idea of whether or not the game could be part of a broader celebration of Australia in China. At about the same time as the game was played each year, Wine Australia, Meat and Livestock Australia, several of our major industries were actually in China at approximate times. So we approached the Australian government, we approached the relevant ministers, the Minister for Trade, particularly was a champion of the concept, and said, look, instead of having these disparate programs, why won't we bring it all together? Why don't we bring together business, media, sport in one program that celebrates the bilateral relationship and promotes Australia? And ultimately that happened. The Festival Australia went ahead. It was a 2-week program that had 43 events, and the last event on the official program was the Australian football game between Port Adelaide and St Kilda. The digital platform alone of these 43 events had a digital reach of 90 million people in China. So it was an extraordinarily successful program that once again was driven by a professional Australian rules team, which when you think about it is quite extraordinary. And there's been further disruption, I guess, through COVID. The bilateral relationship has continued to deteriorate, but I think that program and that concept itself is something that could well be revisited. And frankly, when I was listening to Sylvia and her remarks, I saw a real resonance in what was achieved there and the things that we were trying to do in quite a different context. So I think the distinctive nature of what we tried was something that could find a resonance. We found sport was part of the broader engagement, which was our intention. We didn't want it to sit isolated from the bilateral relationship. It achieved a broader engagement in Australia. Australians aren't necessarily inclined to international relations. The relationship with China, our understanding of China was perhaps superficial, but because of sport, there was this period where the Australian population as a whole was looking to China because of the uniqueness of the concept, because it involved sport, because there was, I guess, a level of curiosity about what we were trying to achieve. So it did have that popular engagement in the bilateral relationship, but it also expressed a really positive aspect of the people-to-people links, notwithstanding some of the very real problems that we have between our two countries on a government-to-government level. There exists some very deep relationships that go back generations that have been cultivated through sport, through the arts, through education. And it gave a brief opportunity every year to shine a light on some of the more positive aspects, the people-to-people aspects of the bilateral relationship. So when I try and relate this back, I guess, to what is being achieved in Wales at the moment, I think it's a great indulgence to be able to tell this story, but I think more of what Australia can learn from Wales. I think that the fact that the British Council has recognised its distinctiveness, I think, is important. The fact that Wales is looking to deploy innovative techniques and tools in the service of diplomacy, such as sports diplomacy, I think is terribly significant and something that Australia could do a little bit better. But also, even from a very superficial level, the fact that this is an event that's taking place and facilitates and services two different language groups, the distinctiveness that is really coming out. And Australia is a very linguistically rich country, but our Indigenous languages aren't part of our national anthem. The Indigenous colours aren't on our national flag. So I don't think we appropriately, and I don't think we do enough really to give that expression of our distinctive national character. So it was a great pleasure to be able to talk to you, but and to listen to the other speakers, because from my perspective, I hope the audience got a little bit out of this, but I think there's a lot more that Australia can learn from Wales and the approach that it's taken.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Andrew, and thanks to all our guests. So fascinating setup there, and we have questions that you've been putting in as well. Now, the first of those questions is from Tim Hartley, and it's now addressed to the people that you haven't heard from, who've been sitting listening to all this, Gavin and Stuart, the people who put the original Welsh strategy report together. Now, the question is that it seems that the North Macedonian government, from what we heard from Sylvia, gets sports diplomacy. Does the Welsh government in the same way, or is sports diplomacy something that becomes a kind of bolt-on every 4 years in the build-up or the aftermath or duration of a major sporting event, Olympics, Rugby World Cup, Football Euros, etc., etc.? And does that support and partnership towards peak opportunities by all means mean that there are longer term strategies, particularly in other areas, trade, academia and tourism perhaps, that are being missed? Now, we don't have the Welsh government to answer that question here, but we do have the guys who put the report together that advise the Welsh government. So Gavin, Stuart, what do you think of that?
Stuart, I'm happy to take that one if it helps. So obviously I can't speak directly for the Welsh government. I'm an independent consultant engaged by the British Council Wales to undertake this research. But what I can say is numerous members of the Welsh government, particularly the international team, partnered closely with us on this research. They were very open and very helpful. They're aware that we're still at a relatively early part of the journey in terms of sports diplomacy. Having said all that, Wales does already have quite a strong track record in sports diplomacy. So if we just rewind to the Rugby World Cup in Tokyo, in Japan, Wales sent its largest trade and cultural relations delegation to that event. It set up something called the Wales Dome, which was a purpose-built dome near a major shopping centre in Japan, and hosted a number of events around trade, cultural relations, language, building deeper ties between Japan and Wales. And there has been a really sort of enduring relationship between the two countries moving forward. So a really great example. His name sits on my mind at the moment. The current head of Asia Rugby, who was a Japanese guy who was instrumental in bringing the World Cup to Japan. He actually studied in Cardiff in Wales, and it was in Wales where he developed a real love of rugby union, took that back to Japan, and the story speaks for itself. And these ties have carried on, and there are sort of partnerships between Wales, Cardiff, and a couple of major cities within Japan. Having said all that, something that Sylvia described in her work with North Macedonia, which is really inspiring, is what they're trying to do is look at major sports events moving forward as staging posts. The sporting calendar is always busy. There's always a major event. We have the Qatar World Cup around the corner, but the Women's World Cup coming in Australia, New Zealand, Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, many other events. So it's about whether Wales can think more forward, thinking about how we deploy our diplomats, our sports people, our ambassadors to those events, and take a horses for courses approach. Are we looking to deliver maybe international development outcomes? Are we looking at trade outcomes? Are we looking at culture and language? So to sum up, we've got some runs on the boards. We can do better. The Welsh government are aware of that. They've been working with us, and they've got some ambitious planning in the background. Grant mentioned the public diplomacy and soft power action plan. Let's see where we get to in the next sort of 3, 5, 10 years moving forward.
Okay, Stuart, anything to add?
Just really quickly, because I do want to get back to the panelists. I think it's a really good question that Timothy asks, and I think one of the arguments we were making is that there are long-term strategies for education, tourism, and trade, but we don't have one for sport. So we were arguing that if sport is so important to Welsh culture and society, then and if diplomacy is a representation of that society abroad, then we should really start to think, maybe not so much a strategy, but certainly having the conversation. And we hope the report served that purpose to some end. But I'll come back with a few remarks, Bryn. I think we've got 5 minutes. But back to the panelists, I'd really like to hear just some of the questions that are coming through from the audience are excellent. So back to you, Bryn, and
Absolutely.
the panelists.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, a question for Grant. You've worked closely with sports stakeholders and advised governments. What do you think is the way forward for a country like Wales or Scotland as we do start to come to terms with the current COVID context? I think you're on mute there, Grant.
Thank you, Bryn. I mentioned the word connectivity. That can have a number of different meanings, but as Wales is clearly doing, Scotland's still on that journey. I think a quick win is to just join up the different stakeholders who are interested in this territory and work more efficiently and effectively together. I do think, it is a godsend if this happens, but having the right people in the right place in the right positions who understand what sport can do makes a huge difference. If you get it. I mean, Sylvia clearly gets it. Work that Andrew has done, I often used to think in a university context, if you had a principal of a university, and Wales do have some of these, who clearly understand what sport can do, then you can get ahead with doing things. I think it was Mandela who said, very simply, it always seems impossible until it gets done. I think that's a useful mantra. We accept that there's a dark side of sport. That's all accepted, but it shouldn't stop, and it shouldn't get in the way of enlarging the common good. So I think there's efficiencies. I think getting the right people in place. I think joining up. The lesson from COVID is undoubtedly, or one of the the lessons of COVID is just how much social relationships are really important. And I hope, you know, in terms of building back better, some of the work that we've been doing with clubs is encourage them to really understand their fans more, the users, in the same way one might say, whether it's Wales or Scotland or North Macedonia, do we fully understand the recipients of sports diplomacy and what they think about what country A, B, C, D is doing? Because mutuality here is a really important word. So I think these would be some of my starters: mutuality, connectivity, joined up government, understanding what the recipients feel about sports diplomacy, for starters. Hope that helps, Bryn.
Thank you, Grant. Let's move on. We've got more questions to get through. One for Sylvia now. How are you planning to monitor and evaluate? I'm interested in the answer to this. We were discussing this over our meal yesterday evening, to evaluate the impact of your sports diplomacy work. And you also mentioned future sports diplomacy plans for North Macedonia. Could you expand on this a little? So, yeah, how do you come to a conclusion that the effort that you've put in equates to the result that you've got out?
A very interesting and difficult question. But yes, we're doing all the work, but of course, evaluation and monitoring is an important part of this, just to know how efficient we are and whether it's just the perceptions that we are getting, but there are really real outcomes that are coming, and good results from our effort in sports diplomacy. So when drafting the strategy and action plan, there will be indicators about how we are going to following the let's say the action plan on national level, about leverage on next mega sport events, and what, let's say, priorities we will connect to those mega events, because with some of the countries we can see that is tourism or trade, or maybe more in culture, programs about sport exchanges. So we need to make sure that we really focus on the right priorities, and we set up the right priorities when we are, let's say, connecting sports diplomacy with mega events, sport mega events. And then I think it will be also difficult, maybe on national level within the action plan, we can manage to evaluate this. But let's say going further down to the local level, to the grassroots sports diplomacy that is taking part on a regular basis, and it's not monitored by us because it's done by sport organizations and athletes and civil society sector. I think that will be the most difficult to track and record, because they're doing such a wonderful job, even as we speak, but we do not have enough access or information on what they're currently doing. So for me, being part previously from the civil society sector, knowing of what we achieved so far, but that not been promoted on a national level, all the national authorities haven't been informed about our results in bringing communities and nations together. It's something that we really have to work on more in the future. So when we combine the sports and diplomacy strategy and action plan on a national level, there will always have to be a pillar of the grassroots sports diplomacy, and then to link those two together. So I think at the end, that is how we will see what has been done, what are the outcomes, what are the lessons learned, and how we can further improve our effort in sports diplomacy, because I believe there are lessons that will say that this was done in a correct way, but this is something that leaves the room for improvement. So it's a very complex domain. We are working on that. Of course, I will partner about this together with Gavin and the rest of the experts in this group, because measuring sports diplomacy outcomes and results on national local level, it's tough, but it's very much needed. Otherwise, we will not know whether we are really moving in the direction that we would like to move, and with which rhythm we are moving, whether we should slow down or we should go even faster?
Thank you, Sylvia. A question for Andrew. You focused largely on the Commonwealth Government's role in the events and relations you've described. However, the understanding of the question is that the South Australian government had significant interests and objectives in this also. So could you elaborate on this, particularly in reference to trade and investment, tourism, sister states and related areas?
Yeah, I mean, the South Australian government played an important role. They supported financially the games that were played in China, and I think from, you know, in that context, I think it's a nice indicator as to why, for some subnational governments, in particular the smaller ones, I mean, in Australian context, South Australia is one of the smaller jurisdictions, that sports diplomacy is perhaps an even greater opportunity. Because, you know, Australians like an underdog, but it forces you to think a little bit more creatively and innovatively about how you portray yourself. If we were looking at China, for example, and, you know, when we are looking to compete, our universities are looking to compete for international students, or we're looking for our products to compete. South Australia isn't as well. There's not the same resonance as Sydney, for example, or Melbourne, New South Wales, Victoria. So I think using sport and culture is a great way for a smaller jurisdiction to stand out, and the South Australian government, particularly in the first couple of years, was very strongly supportive of it. I should say, I mean, the Australian government's first sports diplomacy strategy was developed and released in 2015, but just a month before that, the South Australian government actually released its own sports diplomacy strategy. So I think it's a nice indicator at that particular time, under somebody called Premier Weatherall, there was an emphasis on how to promote South Australia in a different way, because we knew that if we were trying to compete on the same level, then we simply wouldn't be able to compete for resources and a number of other reasons with the bigger jurisdictions. So sports diplomacy, I think, has an even greater opportunity for the subnational governments, particularly the smaller ones, and in a different context, the smaller sovereign governments, because they need to innovate, they need to create to be able to compete.
Excellent, thank you, Andrew. Can I ask you one further question, which is from my own little reading into the work you've been doing? And I think you hinted at this. How is it a fundamental problem that if you have a change of leadership, as you've had in Australia, that changes perspectives on things? So the work that you've done on a micro scale, in a sense, is impacted by the bigger picture?
I think that is the case, and I think, I mean, in Australia there has been relative stability in terms of the governments. We have a third-term government at the moment, but within that period we've had 3 different prime ministers. So, we used to, when I was at university, we used to refer to Japan as a karaoke democracy, whereas, you know, if you hung around long enough, you had the chance to sing. Australia, I think, has turned into much the same. But I think there is still, I mean, Stuart's done a fantastic job being able to inform, policy towards sports diplomacy. But I think it's certainly the case that you just need to, we need to be relentless in our approach to make sure that we continually articulate this so that it does become a regular part of our international relations, whereas it's not at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm conscious of the time here. Unfortunately, we are running towards our conclusion. If anybody's asked questions that haven't yet been answered, then they will be answered via email. So you will get a response to any of the questions you've asked. But as we head towards our conclusion, for what I hope you will agree has been a very interesting hour or so thus far, it would be now the opportunity to bring in Stuart and Gavin, the guys who wrote the Welsh strategy report in the first instance, to give their conclusion in terms of what they've been hearing today and what they've heard since the report was first launched. So over to you guys, Stuart and Gavin.
And I think I'll run off here, Gav, and I'll explain why towards the end of my remarks. But just thank you, Bryn, first of all. Just three very quick remarks. I've probably got about 4 or 5 minutes. First of all, just 3 things I'd like to talk about: the panel and the panelists, my comments on the topic, and then just the project, and most importantly our report, you know, that's still out there. And just first of all to the panel and the panelists, thank you very, very much. Great to see 3 sports diplomacy legends in action. Just sheer class, you know, just a real good example of theory into practice. I think the difference from the first launch and the second launch, we're starting to see more evidence come around sports diplomacy, a lot more data, a lot more policy, great ideas. Sylvia mentioned measuring effectiveness at the end. So there's a lot happening in the space, even in the past 3 months. It's fascinating. And I could talk to each comment. I had a number of comments for Grant. The Celtic nations, my eyebrows perked up, of course. And when you mentioned Motherwell Football Club, that was when you got me there. Sylvia, I could talk as well. Congratulations on all your work over the past couple of months. And I think we forget to mention that both Sylvia and Andrew are former sports people that have transferred into this political and commercial space as well, which serves a really good example for other sports people out there. Just the breadth of topics you mentioned, digital sports diplomacy, grassroots, just absolutely fascinating. And I really like these stories about mixing wine, sport, trade, and travel. It sort of makes me realize why we're all in this game, COVID passing really quickly. So thank you very much. Andrew, I just adore that story about China. I think it's really, really fascinating. We forget it's our most important trading relationship and arguably one of our most important security relationships. And sport provides the briefest pressure release, particularly in the past couple of months, couple of years, sorry. My comment on the topics, just great to see the theory and practice of sports diplomacy growing all over the world. The theory is just growing all over the world, as I mentioned. The practice, exactly the same. We saw the EU sports ministers meet in Lisbon a couple of weeks ago to talk about sports diplomacy. 3 or 4 conferences I've done certainly in the past 2 or 3 weeks, one in Iran that Andrew was at as well, and they were asking the same questions that we're asking tonight. The United States State Department renaming their Sports United program to sports diplomacy, that Detlef Schrempf, the NBA player, describes as the best kept secret of US foreign policy. Japan and the Olympics that's going on right now. And of course, the biggest news in the sports diplomacy universe in the past sort of week, Brisbane getting the Olympic Games in 2032, and everyone can come and stay. It's an open invitation in that sense. So, why this growth in sports diplomacy? It's the diplomacy. That's the whole point of it. It's not politics, it's diplomacy. It's about realizing mutually reciprocal outcomes. Sport and politics do mix. They don't mix well. Sport and diplomacy mix seamlessly. There's a very big difference in that respect. Finally, the project and the report. I just need to say thank you very much to the Welsh Government, to the British Council, Wales, to Jenny, Chris, Walter, and the Welsh sports diplomacy expert, the Rookie of the Year, Rosa Bickerton. We started on a journey in 2018, started by the man I'm about to pass you over to. It started in a pub in London, and where we've came, this idea from then to where we are today is quite remarkable. Thanks to everyone involved, we've created a habitus, to use Bordeaux's term, theory, policy, discussion, practice. And again, we have this gorgeous little report that I just keep next to me on the desk. Today is about celebrating hard work, good friendships, and the habitus. Tomorrow is about the more important part, what happens next. The United Kingdom and Wales is full of talented policy entrepreneurs. Sport, everyone has said the same thing tonight. Sport is hugely important. It's an asset that needs to be tapped into, and now is the time. The last bit, I just really need to hand over to Gavin, really to pay tribute to Gavin. This was his idea. He started it. He was the one that approached me in London, and he's driven the entire project, and it just wouldn't be possible without him. And I think it's a really good example of what individuals can do in this space as well. And that's something you can all do out there. That to those that are listening, we're there to help. You're more than welcome to our team. And we're really, really interested in building this international society of sport. And just thanks again to everyone, and over to you, Gav. And thanks from my point of view thank you so much for coming up to me that very first day. It means a lot to me, mate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stuart. I don't know how to follow that, but look, I'm certainly not going to give you an Oscar speech, but I just want to say thank you, Diolch yn fawr, so much to everybody involved in this. This event to me is testament to the power of sports diplomacy. When you think of the network of people around the world that are tuning in, our guests who have kindly provided their time and expertise from North Macedonia, Scotland and Australia. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Really, really appreciate it. It's not every day in Wales that we get such a diverse raft of stakeholders tuning in for one of our events. So that is really fantastic. Just a couple of points. I won't keep you too long. I just want to wrap up and draw in a few things from the presentations and link it to the stuff we're doing in Wales. So I'll start with Andrew. I know he was a little concerned when we first started speaking to him about how would the case study around Port Adelaide, Australian Rules Football Club, South Australia, how would that relate to the Welsh perspective? Well, from my perspective, it's really important. It is an example of a non-state sporting actor in Port Adelaide Football Club being really pioneering, doing some fantastic work in the sports diplomacy space. It's also a great example of a paradiplomatic actor. So paradiplomacy is the international activities of sub-states, regions, basically actors not at the non-sovereign level. So that's really important for Wales. Wales is a devolved nation within the UK. So maybe we can learn from Andrew's experience and experience of Port Adelaide about how we navigate the matrix of actors within the UK, within Europe and wider afield. And that's really important for us because the UK level has one of the biggest diplomatic networks in the world. It has a major international footprint of ambassadors, embassies. At the UK civil service level, there are actors like the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, Department for International Trade, and many other actors. So how do we get the best from those? But then also, how do we do things in a uniquely Welsh way? The best of both worlds at the Welsh and UK level. Grant, I mean, another wide-ranging, fantastic presentation. But one thing I'd like to sort of, I guess, laser in on it. Grant sort of finished on football, and it's not all about football. All sports can be used for sports diplomacy, as Andrew showed through Australian Rules Football. But I think that the power of the world game, many people will see it as the most important sport in the world in terms of its footprint and media exposure. But I think football diplomacy is important. I know Grant is doing some groundbreaking work at the University of Edinburgh around heat maps. So imagine what we could do if we could look at heat maps online and find out, for example, who was talking about Wales at Euro 2016. Where are they? What are they saying? And then we can think about how we might engage with them and partner with them. Same goes for North Macedonia at the recent Euros, their first major football event as a sovereign nation. I think that's a really interesting piece of work, and it taps into sort of deeper cultural relations and some of the other stuff the British Council has done on wider cultural relations, on soft power and things like that. And then also Sylvia, I mean, look, to me, you're an inspiring person. You've really driven the agenda in North Macedonia, in the region. It's music to my ears, the outcomes that you've achieved through those events. I think, it's just the start for you guys. And I was lucky enough to be part of a UK trade delegation working with North Macedonia to try and negotiate the first ever trade deal between the UK and North Macedonia. What I have to say is wonderful people, open-minded, really progressive, wanting to partner with the world. So, you live in the values of that again through this sports diplomacy program. And also what I have to say, we have to keep it fun and lighthearted, is I also thought that the uniforms that the North Macedonian team had at the opening ceremony Olympics, those bright red shoes, I mean, they're a soft power asset in themselves. I mean, I was like, wow, these guys look fantastic. So I think on that lighthearted note, I might draw my comments to a close and hand back over to Bryn. Thank you so much, everybody.
Brad, you're on mute. Could you unmute yourself?
Point. I get right to the end, and that's the first time I forget to unmute myself. Can I just say thank you to Stuart and to Gavin and to our fabulous panel of guests as well, to Grant, to Sylvia and to Andrew for their contribution. Really hope you've enjoyed it. I look forward to somebody in the future telling the story of how a small town in Northeast Wales with its football club became a global brand leader in the international game of football, because I'm a Wrexham Football Club supporter and we have our Hollywood ownership now. Maybe another example there of sports diplomacy and its power in the offing, about to be told. But to all of you engaging in this increasingly interesting area, and as we've heard over the last hour or so, something that is becoming even more important, ever more important to governments around the world. So good luck in all of your endeavours. As was mentioned earlier, if you did ask a question that wasn't answered, then it will be answered by email. And just to mention as well that the British Council is planning a future sports diplomacy event in partnership with Australia around the Commonwealth Games next year. So watch this space for details on that one. So diolch fawr iawn to everybody for listening. Remember, this is available online to watch back again, or if you want to point other people in the direction of the discussion, it is available for you to do that. And we look forward to you all joining us again for something similar in future. Thank you very much. Diolch fawr iawn.